Hey everyone, welcome back to Kubrick Corner with me, Sean Wilson. So this week sees the release of A Quiet Place, which is the new movie directed by John Krasinski, formerly of the American version of The Office. And this is an interesting case, not only for the fact that he's an actor turned director, and you wouldn't necessarily credit him with this sort of movie based on his past roles, but also in the UK at least, we're getting this and Ghost Stories released on the same day in April. So we're getting two major horror releases on release in April, and both of which are absolutely fantastic. I've already reviewed Ghost Stories here on the channel. You can go and check out that review and let me know what you think of both the review and the film. But A Quiet Place, I'm really happy to say, is just as good as Ghost Stories for similar, although also dissimilar reasons as well. So as I said, directed by John Krasinski, it stars both him and Emily Blunt, who are of course married in real life, as these parents who are trying to eke out a living in America in the wake of this undisclosed disaster, which you see only through like newspaper clippings and bits and pieces of information. You're never really given the full picture as to what actually has happened in the wake of this disaster. But during this quite brilliant opening sequence, which plays out almost in near silence bar the score from Marco Beltrami, you see the two parents played by Blunt and Krasinski and their children, one of whom is played by the brilliant Millicent Simmons, who is deaf in real life and who gives a fantastic performance in this, as this family unit who are making their way through the supermarket in almost complete silence. They're walking on tiptoes, they're not wearing shoes, they seem terrified of knocking over any kind of objects and making any kind of noise. The youngest son is told that this battery-powered toy is not allowed because one assumes it will make noise. They are communicating in sign language, and then you realise at the end of the opening sequence what exactly the threat is and what the consequences are of making too much sound, which is that America has now become overrun with these absolutely hideous creatures that prey on sound, and the slightest little explosion of sound, anything louder than the tapping of feet, will bring basically this absolute monstrosity down on them. And this has tragic consequences in the opening sequence. We then jump forward to the remainder of the family unit, and we find out that Blunt's character is now pregnant with a new child, which comes fraught with all kinds of possibilities with regards to noise and to all the terror of this situation. And then this situation subsequently becomes, how do they school their remaining two children, one of whom is also played by Noah Jupe from Suburbicon, who, as in Suburbicon, does an absolutely brilliant portrayal of quavering fear in this as well. It's really good. How do they educate their two children in the art of not making noise? And what you then get is really quite a fascinating commentary, really, about how much noise we generally tend to make as human beings. There's a fantastic sequence in which the family is sat around a table and they can't say anything, they can't talk, they can't make any noise whatsoever, and you get almost this near silent dinner table conversation. And what Krasinski does quite brilliantly is he takes it, there's a purity to it. It takes it right the way back to the early days of cinema, in which we didn't get dialogue, we didn't get sound effects, all we got was a score. And really there's a lovely kind of purity to that, and it really reinforces how acting, or more specifically acting in the hands of actors who are really good, like Emily Blunt, can communicate a lot through physical gesture. You don't actually need dialogue at all to really communicate what's going on. There are slivers of dialogue in the movie. It's not a completely silent movie, but I'd venture to say probably about 70 to 80% of it is dialogue free. Again, you do get the score, you get sound effects, but most of it is dialogue free, and it's a really impressive technical accomplishment. And again, what it does, it throws more emphasis onto the physicality of the performances and about how the actors have to communicate what the characters are thinking and feeling in these horrible circumstances without saying anything. And it also becomes about what Krasinski is telling you visually. It is happening in the moment. There's a system whereby there are lights that are lit outside their farmhouse, which is used for very, very chilling effect later on, which did remind me to some extent of M. Night Shyamalan's The Village, which I actually think happens to be quite an underrated M. Night Shyamalan movie. And the temptation with this whole thing about monsters that prey on human instinct did to some extent remind me of another M. Night Shyamalan movie, a dreadful one, which was After Earth, which is, in that you've got blind monsters who smell fear, which was just a stupid concept, whereas in this you've got blind monsters that hear things. And the design of the creatures, I suppose the most comparable thing I would say is if you remember the lickers from the early Resident Evil games, it's sort of reminiscent of that. The creature designs are very, very well done and very scary. And there are genuinely it knotted my guts up knowing right from the very start. I mean, again, it's brilliant how scary it is when you strip sound out of everything, how discombobulating and how disorienting that is. And Krasinski really does milk that. Again, there is a score which I think is actually used rather well. It's used very judiciously. But it's amazing how much of an eerie atmosphere that creates, and it does really help earmark the film as a relatively unique, particularly when compared to all the incredibly loud, noisy, insidious, sinister movies that we've had lately. I mean, there are jump scares in this, but it doesn't feel cheap because the atmosphere of the movie is generally so well done, and you do get invested in the characters, and you are really intrigued in the scenario. And there are several terrifying set pieces. I mean, the most famous one, which is revealed in the trailer, or hinted at in the trailer, is the one involving Emily Blunt in the bath, which is genuinely quite brilliantly nerve-wracking, and it really does sort of show Krasinski is a really confident director of horror. Again, there's nothing I've seen from him in the past, right from The Office through to the Sam Mendes film Away We Go, would have indicated that he could have tackled this kind of material so well, and he does brilliantly. And frankly, I'd love to see another horror movie from him. I've got no idea if he plans to do it, but he really should. So yeah, really, really confident, really well done movie. Again, towards the end of the movie, there are maybe some contrived set pieces. There is a general sort of maybe vaguely mechanical error about the way that certain things sort of play out, the way that certain segments of the plot have to fit into each other. But really well acted from its multi-generational cast across the board. Some really atmospheric set pieces, really beautifully filmed. Charlotte Bruce Christensen, who filmed the most recent version of Far From the Madding Crowd, really does give you this sense of despair and waste that's been left behind as these creatures have gone on their rampage. And again, the brilliant thing about the movie is it doesn't over-explain anything. It doesn't give you a lot of context as to what's happened. And that's very, very effective, because what you come up with in your own imagination is infinitely more scary than what any movie can explain to you through reams and reams of exposition. I thought that was really impressive. So yeah, go and check it out. It's called A Quiet Place. It's out this week. And drop me a comment here at Kubrick Corner with your thoughts on both the review and the film. See you soon.